one of the people quite well qualified to compare old and new, although I still have to admit that I wasn't going in the 50s and 60s, because the sport has changed dramatically between those two decades and the 70s and 80s, which is when I came in. And we had a proper speed and endurance test to deal with. And the dressage mattered, but it didn't matter a huge amount. At top level, it obviously mattered more because there were more people that were good at doing all the other phases. And the show jumping was consisting of some very heavy rails, much heavier than they are now in show jumping, and 10 penalties every time you knock one down. So that side of it has changed enormously. The dressage test was a great deal more straightforward, but believe me, I found it way too difficult. It was never a technique that I grasped, dressage, and it was rather put neatly into a basket by 5 times gold medalist, I think, Hans Winkler for Germany in show jumping, when I went to have a week's education with him after I'd won my first badminton back in 1973. I was 19 and somebody had given me the opportunity to go and improve my not very good show jumping. And he watched me jumping, I remember her distinctly, liver chestnut, heavy warm blood mare. I'd never ridden one like that in my life. And he sent me around a course about 1.15 m, and as I finished, he said, "This horse that you've just won badminton on, what was his name?" And I was so excited. He wanted to know the name, this great Hans Winkler. I said, "Be fair," very excited. And he shook his head and he said, "This Be Fair, he must be some horse." And basically from that, he went on to say that the best riders in Germany go into dressage. The next best riders go into show jumping, and the riff-raff go into eventing. So from a very early age, I was aware that we weren't held in very high esteem in comparison to the other two sports. And I'd say that's one of the biggest changes that I've seen happen, is that now the top level do appear to be able to ride dressage really well and show jump really well, which was absolutely not the case in our day. And I watched the videos of those 70s and 80s of the riders that I held in very high esteem doing their dressage or doing their show jumping now, thinking, whoa, the sport has come a long, long way. And in my day, we were really a little bit jack of all trades, master of none, although if you were master of any, it was across country, which was why I was lucky enough to get a bit ahead at times. But nowadays, I feel it's master of all three. To be really good at eventing, you have to be really good at all three disciplines. And it takes a long time to learn it. I think most people are born with a leaning towards one phase or another. And I'll take two of the great riders of our time, William Fox-Pitt and Pippa Funnell. And I'd say Pippa was born into a dressage leaning and William was born into a cross-country leaning. And each one had to learn the other, and they've both done it, and they're both incredibly good at each of the phases now. And a lot of the riders of present day are also show jumping at a very high level. I mean, 1.40 m, 50. And some of them are doing dressage at a very high level. So they've really thrown so much at their sport to become masters of each phase, and not just what I felt we were, the jack of all trades. The whole sport has changed so much, because when we started, we really had to have a fit horse. They went a long way on their roads and tracks, probably 10, 11 kilometers on phase C, maybe 5 or 6 on A, and then back to miles now, a 2-mile steeplechase, it was 5 minutes or more, and that was a fair old gallop, with 10 steeplechase fences, any one of which could take you out because you were coming quite fast. And that did set you up for cross country. It really got your blood up and it got you going, even though you had nearly an hour before you actually started your cross country. I always said I'd never want to ride around badminton without having done the chase first. I just don't know how you get your horse and yourself on the game and adrenalized. But now they have to do that. And one of the big disadvantages of losing the speed and endurance of roads and tracks would, I think, be that very few riders now learn how to ride a horse when he's a little tired. In our day, we had tired horses, not madly tired, but they'd been quite a distance with phase A, B, C, and D. And incidentally, before my time, there was a phase E, which was a roll around 2 miles of just slow cantering, which is actually physiologically apparently a very good thing to wind the horses down. That went out before I came in. But the feeling of riding a tired horse, or a horse that has got the edge off him, is a skill. You have to work a lot harder, you have to be very fit yourself, and you have to be very judgmental about the lines you take, because you wouldn't take a severe angle, probably not at any fence at badminton, but certainly not in the last half when the horse's edge would be off him a bit more. Because if a horse touches the fence on the angle, it turns him over much, much quicker than if he hits it full on. And I'll never forget being taught that if a horse is going to hit it and he hits it full on, there's a chance he can scramble over if you can stay on. But if he hits it on an angle, it flicks him straight over. So that is something I've really noticed has been a disadvantage of the whole cross-country test being condensed. But at the same time, it's brought in learning to ride at speed, much faster than we went. Economic lines, that's when you have to be a real judge of whether to take that angle or not. It's brought in a lot of advances in understanding horses' health, their heart rates and how fit they need to be. My feeling is that they're possibly, and this is a real generalisation, not as fit as they were, but they're a different sort of fitness. They're a faster fitness now, and it was a very much an endurance fitness before. So the short format, if you like, without the roads and tracks and steeplechase, came in shortly after Sydney Olympics, and it came in because the head of the FEI, who in those days was the Infanta of Spain, said we can't afford eventing to have falls and bad sights, or it'll get thrown out of the Olympics. I don't know whether this was the right reason, but it was said to have been much backed by continental countries who didn't breed many thoroughbreds. Who knows if that is the truth or not? But it's a difficult one because it doesn't stop things going wrong just because you shorten everything. And other problems have come in because things have been shortened, such as sometimes too much speed and sometimes not being really aware how to ride a horse with the edge off him. So it's had its downturn, and it's produced a much higher level of dressage and show jumping, which has got a little bit of a twin-edged sword there, because it's wonderful to see people riding so well in those two phases. But the breeding of the horses has taken more significance from dressage and show jumping. And they don't always produce the fastest thinkers, the dressage horses. They don't always produce the most courageous, the show jumpers. The top class one, I'm sure, is both. But they need to be very courageous across country, and if something goes wrong, they need to have that sort of attitude, never mind, on we go. And sometimes when they're a little bit careful, because they're show jumping bred or dressage bred, and they make a mistake, it ruffles them, and then they become nervous and they become backy-offy, and then that's when accidents happen. So that toughness of spirit, which is, in my view, courage, but it's more than that. The toughness of spirit is a little bit being bred out of some of the horses of today. And I feel that's a real problem. The original cross-country horse wasn't very good at dressage, probably not very careful show jumping either, but boy, he was good at his job cross-country, and he saved your skin every time. And I would like to see us somehow find a way of developing the sport away from these slightly precious, slightly perfect horses and into a horse that is maybe more a horse that's going to win at Aintree. He's more going to just say, I can do this, and stick his chin out and go for it. Because I think ultimately that is safer. But the safety element is obviously never going to get any smaller, and we're happy with that. We're very glad that these deformable fences have come in. They have saved an awful lot of falls, and that can only be good. So long as none of us ever think, oh, it's deformable, we'll ride at it worse. I don't think we ever will, because we get penalties for knocking a cross-country fence down. But the disappointing thing of that is you see people looking behind them as they gallop away from a cross-country fence to see if it's come down or not. But that's disappointing because they never came down before. But it's a mindset that we have to get used to, and it's in the name of preventing accidents, and for that end it's got to be a good thing. So I'm not against that at all. I'm not sure that I want it to go all the way to filling logs with polystyrene and having them hanging on frangible pins so that even a log falls down. I mean, I think that the challenge of the sport is that you do respect the fences and you do make a bid to jump them as well as you can, and if something goes wrong and you land in the middle of the corner, which can happen and we see happen occasionally, the fence falls away and that gets you out of turning upside down, or gets you out of what we now know to be a rotational fall. And that's an interesting one, because I don't believe we barely ever saw a rotational fall in the good old days. And I think there's a mechanical reason for that, because I think the post hole digger didn't come in till, I believe, the 70s or 80s, and without the post hole digger, you're digging them in by hand. They're not going in very far. So there's a natural give in the uprights. There's a natural frangibility, which I think is why we fell all over the place, but we didn't have those complete rotationals that have created the terrible fatality. So I think in a way, the post hole digger, whilst wonderful, I went for a course builder's lesson, if you like, at Burley a few years ago, and they were going in 3 to 4 feet, these uprights, so you could almost build a house on the foundations of each upright of each fence. There isn't going to be 1 centimetre of give in an upright that goes in like that. So I think in a funny way we had naturally frangible fences, and the ones that weren't were the sleeper tables, and those were the ones that caused the first fatality. And they were put under a law that they must have a slope to them so the horse could clearly see the back. And now, believe this or not, there's a frangible table going around in America, which in a way I worry about things giving way when a horse isn't expecting them to, because horses often use a table to bank, to go on and off. And if it collapses underneath them, it's not going to be a good outcome. And similarly, they use a rail that's going down a drop into a coffin or a quarry, and they'll put their back legs on it to slow themselves down and give them balance. And if that gives way, that's not going to be a good outcome either. So we've got to be very careful how we use this wonderful knowledge of deformable fences, I feel. But I'm wholly in favour of it as a way forward. Still, I feel very strongly that we've got to keep the excitement in cross country. We've got to keep the risk element. Will always be there. You haven't even got to ride a horse to have a risk element, but there will always be that. And we mustn't apologise for our sport, because it is the cross country that makes it what it is, and it always has made it what it is. And if we're not careful, we're going to find we produce a pretty boring sport of second-rate dressage and show jumping. However good we are at those, we're never going to be as good as the boys that do pure dressage or pure show jumping, and then follow it with an exhibition cross country. And I think that's where the danger lies, and we've got to find the balance that gives the cross country the winning edge over the other 2 phases. It will be interesting to see, and I would love that all of us discuss as much as possible how we see it going forwards.